Welcome to the Agile Strategy Meetup group. My name is Morten Elvang, and this evening, it's a real pleasure to have Evan from the Business Agility Institute joining us. And we have been talking a little bit about what this is all about just before everybody joined, and we're asking the same questions for you, Evan. What is your take on where strategy is going from what you have seen? And if someone in the Agile community or working as an internal change agent in an organization should be interested in working with this area and getting into the area of strategy, any advice you could offer? Other than that, the by now normal format, 30 minutes for you, and then the rest of the time for open questions and answers. Is that okay?
Of course.
Very well. So welcome.
Brilliant. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm going to keep this as sort of informal and conversational as I can. It's a small group. First question though is, and maybe if you want to use the chat or just come off mute and share, I'd like to understand who's in the room in terms of your understanding and experience, both in the context of obviously strategic planning and corporate strategy, but also in the context of business agility. I don't so much mean agile from a product and technology standpoint, but I am talking about business agility in the context of organizational dynamics, organizational structure and strategy. So maybe if people can just quickly share, I'd like to just get a lay of the land as to how much of the background information I'm going to have to provide. Tom, do you want to just share 20 seconds, 30 seconds?
On what? On strategy?
No, on who you are and what your understanding is.
Oh, okay. I'm like a freelance author, teacher, methods developer, including strategy. And I've held a talk in this series before, which I've just sent you by email, so you can listen to it. And that's it.
Brilliant. Tiago, I'll just go through the list as I've got them. Tiago.
And I work with agility for 20 years, I think. I did the ICP BAF authorization with you some time ago. No, agility in HR. So I work with agility, and sometimes I help companies to be more agile on their strategy.
Brilliant. Ken.
Yeah, I've kind of done a lot of different roles in my time. So sort of architecture, strategy in large organizations, organizational transformations, organizations, but also big, large systems design and software engineering, systems engineering, telecoms, all that sort of stuff. And but latterly, I'm now working on developing a problem-solving technique, which is applied to strategy and also business and social situations.
Oh, fantastic. This is a pretty high-powered group so far. I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Sigbjorn. And if you, yeah.
Hi, so I'm actually an economist. I don't know if I belong to that group. No, I'm teaching strategy to engineering students in a master in industrial economics. So I'm just basically here to learn as much as possible from you guys in the industry. And I don't really have any experience with agile and methodology, but I'm just sort of from the sideline, devouring everything I can.
All right, fantastic. I'll make sure I cover enough of the background context. But if you do feel lost at any point, please obviously just like speak up and we can go into details. This is meant to be open, and as I'll make it as conversational as we can. Christoph and Sylvia, understand you're both in listening mode. Appreciate that. Enjoy your traveling. So let me just take 30 seconds, and my name is Evan Leybourn. As Morten mentioned, I am one of the co-founders of the Business Agility Institute. I definitely know some of you. I've been working in the business agility space now for since 2008. So what's that? 16 odd years. Agile before that since 2003. But when we talk about business agility, for those who have not come across the Business Agility Institute, and I've got 1 or 2 slides just for context, we would talk about and define business agility as the set of organizational capabilities, behaviors, and ways of working. It is not the practices, it's not what you do, it's not agile, it's rather how you act. If you behave with agility, you have agility. And it's these behaviors that affords an organization the freedom, the flexibility, and the resilience to achieve their purpose, to serve their customer, no matter what the future brings. And so those final 6 words, which I would say are those are the magic words. That's the reason organizations care. Can you achieve your purpose? Can you build the products, deliver the services, serve your customer, no matter what the future brings? Be that global pandemic, geopolitical unrest, economic disruption, technological innovation, or just the small little things. Competitors coming out with products slightly faster than you, or a new opportunity emerges, a new technological innovation inside your organization. How quickly can you respond to that to better achieve your purpose? All the frameworks, all the systems, all the methods in the world mean nothing. Do you have the people who know what needs to be done and can change when needs to change? Nothing else matters. So when we look at strategy on the and I mean, before we do that for 1 second, within the context of business agility, we would talk about the domains of business agility primarily. Now, I know some of you have seen this, so I won't spend too much time here. But for those who have not, the domains of business agility is a research model that we use to understand organizations, both specifically and global trends. The domains themselves is broken up into 5 domains, 18 capabilities, and underneath that, 84 behaviors. Now, I'm not going to go into the level of behavior too much, but just be aware that this is a behavioral and capability model. What you're seeing on the screen here, however, are the capabilities. The capabilities are it's what an organization develops. In many ways, it's the goals of an organization when they're investing in business agility. I like to use the metaphor of going to the gym. Nobody goes to the gym because they enjoy going to the gym. People go to the gym because they want what the gym gives them: strength, speed, stamina, those physical capabilities that they didn't have before. The same is true for organizations. The question is, does an organization have the ability to act as one? Do they have the ability to sense and respond proactively? Do they have the ability to balance governance and risk? Or how effective is their capability? Because it's not binary. It's a range. There's a range of excellence in every one of these capabilities. And organizations strive towards this. We would look at it in terms of cultural capabilities, act as one, psychological safety, creating a learning organization, around customer centricity, the ability to fiercely champion the customer or sense and respond proactively or integrate diverse ideas can your organization, when they have to make a decision between what's right for the company and what's right for the customer, are individuals prioritized or incentivized to do what's right for the customer, knowing that that will be what's right for the company in the long run? And we can have a very, very long conversation around metrics and incentives. And we have a lot of data that shows that short-term financial incentives actually have a perverse impact on the organization, which is bad. Now, the problem is short-term financial incentives are very easy to measure. So most leaders, most organizations are lazy. And I don't mean that in a bad way. That is a very human, evolutionarily, we are evolutionarily lazy. It's how we conserve energy. But it does have consequences, which organizations need to be aware of. We have the leadership capabilities that looks at, do leaders have the ability to build those relationships, to empower with accountability when we look at the organization? That one's an interesting one because a lot of organizations really struggle. Organizations will develop leaders to delegate better, but they don't teach their staff how to take ownership, which is just as much a skill as delegation is. And so we have a lot of leaders who complain, oh, I'm trying to delegate, but no one's taking ownership or no one's taking accountability. It's like, well, that's because you haven't developed their skills. The flexible operations domain is the one that we're primarily going to focus on today, because the first one, adapt strategy seamlessly, is really where we're going to have the dialogue. But there's also the capabilities of funding work dynamically or reorganizing structures fluidly. Can you move people and funds to where they need to be when they need to be there? And I think most organizations really struggle at that. And then lastly, value-based delivery, which looks at, are you doing the right work in the right way for the right people at the right time? And so from a strategic standpoint, that's looking at product strategy, the prioritization, the more operational strategy than the corporate strategy. Now, when we look at adapt strategy seamlessly, now I will note, by the way, that strategy sits in multiple places here. Yes, there is a capability with the word strategy inside it, but organizational strategy requires and touches upon multiple capabilities here. But for the sake of conversation, and the fact that I don't want to be talking for too long, I just would like to highlight some of the behaviors underneath adapt strategies seamlessly. Now, I mentioned that was a behavioral model. Now, there are 84 behaviors that we use when we study organizations. The 4 behaviors that are most strongly connected to adapting strategies are, the first one relates to vision. Executives create vivid and inspiring visions of the future and invest time inspiring everyone towards them. A big element of strategy is ensuring that the organization has alignment and common purpose. Visions are slowly changing. We do not expect an organizational vision to change once a year. We do not expect it to change every 3 months. Whereas the strategy to achieve that vision will change more regularly. The operational plans to achieve the strategy will change even more frequently. But the vision itself is something that, whilst a lot of people talk about it, and every organization has a vision, using that vision is an entirely different thing. And most organizations don't do that well. Most organizations' vision is either overly vague and not tangible. It's not something that people can work towards. Or the vision is their motherhood statements, this is what we stand for, the principles or like vague purposes, or they're just ignored. They're put there on the wall, like the people pay lip service to it, but the systems of the organization, no matter what the vision says, the organizational systems are pull people away from it. And we see that a lot. I'll bring incentives back in for a moment. Here in Australia, a couple of years ago, there was a royal commission into misconduct in the banking sector. And long story short, billions of dollars of fines, top executives, CEOs, board members lost their jobs. And there was, the report found widespread corruption and widespread unethical behavior in the banks. That's probably not of that much surprise. We all know how the banks work. But one of the key findings from the report was that the culture of short-term incentives in the banks was cultivating a culture of short-term, whatever it takes, make the numbers mentality, and was, no matter what the companies, no matter what their vision statement was around serving customers or being the bank of choice or all that sort of things, every system of the organization was geared towards something other than achieving that vision. So vision is something that a lot of organizations talk about, but do very badly, certainly with the connection to strategy. The next behavior. Everyone plans using outcomes rather than outputs. And that is a very common challenge we see. We would define an output as a piece of work. It is the thing that you do, whereas the outcome, by definition, is a behavioral change in a target audience. Right? Two factors in it. You need to know who's changing and what's changing, the behavioral change that's occurring. And the problem is with most organizations, they are planning at the output level, and there's very little connection to, or there is a simplistic or like highly diffuse connection to strategy. And so I'll give a common example, one that came up just the other day when we were talking to one of our members. We just published a piece of research on artificial intelligence. And in that research, one of the challenges that they were having was they put all this investment in chatbots, because of course everyone wants a chatbot. But no one knew why. They just knew that they had their AI strategy, chatbots were a part of it. They had this couple of $1 million budget assigned to this chatbot project output. And when we sort of asked them about why they're doing it, what was the strategy behind it? What was it trying to change? What behavioral change was it trying to create in the audience? It took them a while to articulate it, but what they eventually realized through these conversations was, we want our primary customer, our primary customers, the target audience, to not call the help desk as often and use the self-service functionality on the website more often. Okay, that's a behavioral change. Right? That's very clear. That's a strategic change. Brilliant. Is the chatbot going to achieve that goal? And funnily enough, they actually realized that no, they probably wouldn't. But because budget had been assigned to that piece of work, they couldn't shift to something that was more strategically viable or more strategically valuable. The last two behaviors relate to the leaders and how leaders look at strategy from a longitudinal standpoint. Leaders conduct frequent and regular strategic reviews and updates. Right? How frequent is frequent depends on the organization, depends on the market. For most organizations, it's more than once a year, but most organizations do it only once a year. Now, I will make a very clear note when we talk about agility, and we always have to make this point when we're talking to top executives. The ability to update strategy frequently does not mean that you do update strategy frequently. You update strategy as frequently as is required. The ability to pivot doesn't mean that you're always pivoting, because there is a cost, both to employees, as well as a financial cost in constant churn, constant change. But the point is, when you need to change, you need to change. And most organizations, unfortunately, don't have the muscle memory or the capability to do that. They are set up to change their strategy at most once a year. Right? But that's where the frequent reviews comes in, because you can't change unless you know you need to change. And then lastly, leaders conduct strategic planning across multiple time horizons. Strategy, a lot of organizations will create the 1-year plan, and they will at best have like some like 5-year goals. But we really want to see like multiple time horizons being considered in strategic plans at different levels of specificity and different levels of granularity. And again, it depends on the budget, it depends on the size of the organization as to how much effort needs to go into that. So there's a lot more behind all of this, but what I want to do is just pause for a moment and open up for a little bit of a dialogue between anyone who would like to join. What are you seeing? Is there anything in these behaviors that stands out to you as something that organizations struggle with? And where do you think organizations that you work with or that you're working for, where should they be focusing their energy?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen all of these, of course. So I think, they're just very common, aren't they? I think these ones. It's interesting you got 80. So these are the 4 from your 80 list of behaviors. This is
Yep. I don't have time to go through all of them.
No, of course. I can imagine that's a few hours work of stuff. So yeah, I don't know what to say. These are very common problems from many of the organizations I've ever been involved in. And also from myself, of course, trying to do something myself as a sort of taking the initiative to develop something, inspiring a team, keeping them aligned to these things. I have to live and breathe, just do my own stuff, my own development, my own sort of application with a small team. So I even have these kind of problems. Even
That's it.
So
the other thing that I'd like to just quickly highlight, and you just reminded me. So let me just zoom in a bit. We publish every year. We publish the Business Agility Report, which is a study of hundreds of organizations around the world and the global trends that we see against these capabilities and against the behaviors beneath them. And what we found is that strategic agility or the ability to adapt strategy seamlessly has actually improved in the last 12 months. In fact, it's up 16%. Now, I will note that 2023 was a significant dip, not just in that domain, but just in general. We saw a huge dip in 2023 compared to the global trends as well, going up from 2019 to 2024. Now, but 16% is still a fairly decent improvement year over year. I've actually just brought up the raw data over here. And what I can say is the ability to adapt strategy has actually seen some fairly decent improvements year over year. So if we look at it, it's in 2019, in 2018, so 4.9, 4.7, 4.9, 5.1, 5.2, 4.7, 5.5. So there's been, again, ignoring the dip last year, or 18 months ago, 2 years ago, we've actually seen a steady improvement in organizations' ability to adapt strategies seamlessly in over the last, what are we talking, 7 7 odd years.
How do you measure this then? How do you?
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
got some hands up. I'll stop now because there's some other hands up.
yes, and so Steve will come to you in 1 second, but I'll just quickly answer that question because it's a good question. So when we study organizations, we do a number of different kinds of studies. We've got grounded theory, socio-technical grounded theory studies that are a combination of interviews, surveys, and evidence reviews, where we look at policies and procedures of organizations. We do broad-based surveys, where we just asking people to self-assess where they are. And then we have when we study what we call governance tax, we'll study in organizations how their policies and procedures, how effective are their policies and procedures against what they're trying to achieve as an organization. And we actually find that most organizations are over-governed when it comes to balancing governance and risk. They're spending €5 to save 1 kind of thing. But between that combination of different research methods, depending on the study, is how we collect the information. 6th one.
Yeah, I guess my question is linked to the preceding one. Is so if you look at your framework, I guess your client get it, but going from sort of the abstract, from the boxes to actually implementing it. So what are the kind of behavioral changes you will typically observe in companies that move to more agile strategies? So it's like, what are the first thing they do, or are there kind of any actions changes in the behavior that you observe that sort of, okay, they get it and they are actually doing it? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So let me answer that in 2 ways. So the first is in terms of the key measures. So when we are looking at when we study organizations, we do so. We look at behaviors because behaviors are observable. How someone acts, you can see, and if you can see it, you can measure it, and if you measure it, you can model it. Right? So that's why we do behavioral studies. But what it doesn't tell us is momentum, like how things are changing, or how effectively they're changing. Behavioral studies tell us how it is now. Right? When we want to look at the effectiveness of change, when we look at it from the strategic standpoint, we're looking for 3 key measures. The first is what we call strategic review measures, which is the frequency of strategic review, basically. How often is the strategy validated? Now, we want to see those strategic plans reflecting the latest learning, the latest observations. The key there the caution there is review without action is useless. But from a measure standpoint, we actually don't want to measure the action because we do not want unnecessary change. And one of the cautions around measures is that when you measure something, the act of it's Schrodinger's organization. When you measure it, it changes. The act of measuring changes the organization. So we do not want to incentivize a perverse behaviors just so that they look better on a particular measure, which is why we measure review, not actual strategic change. The second we look at is outcome measures, and that is the percentage of strategic initiatives which are assigned to an outcome measure rather than an output measure, or to an outcome objective rather than an output objective. Now, ideally, we want to set about 100%. Never happens. But that's the challenge, and that goes to that behavior 53. It's like everyone plans using outcomes rather than outputs. We want to see those trends. And then the last one is fidelity, where we want to understand a corporate strategy or a strategic plan should be clear and compelling. And we need to understand, well, no, we want to measure people's understanding of the strategy, and the coherence or the consistency between how everyone can talk about and understands the strategy and how that connects to what they do. Now, when we look at it from a measure standpoint, those three measures help us understand not just where they are now, but how effectively they're moving towards that adaptive strategy approach. The other one that the second part or the second point to your question, there are, in terms of the tactics and the operations, there are a number of different, well, there are thousands of different ways that organizations adopt this. Part of it does depend as to what elements of the strategic planning process are problematic. So when we look at it from, for example, the ability, and let me just use, there we go. So prioritize is one of the capabilities. When we look at that from the strategic standpoint, this is where organizations will adopt practices such as lean portfolio management, or they will adopt planning techniques that are designed around regular reprioritization and validation of strategic plans. Now, obviously, LPM and the sort of adaptive and prioritization can be done at a tactical operational level, or it can be done at an organizational strategic level. And for this conversation, I'm talking about it at that organizational strategic level. When we look at it also from the lens of where are we? There we go. Unleashing workflow. So that's about the flow of work through the system. And so we want to see things like the number of handoffs in the system reduce, because the flow of work should be as seamless as possible. When it comes to the strategic planning process, one of the big issues that we see, and this touches also on Actors 1, by the way, is that the organizational structure, the way that work is, also the way that teams are configured, has an impact on how the organization sees itself, and has a massive impact on the strategy of the organization. Because most organizational strategies are split according to the organizational structure. So if you have a functional hierarchy, which many organizations do, which is not bad. A functional hierarchy is very good for optimizing for skills transfer. It's the apprentice system. It's my boss is I'm an accountant. My boss is the head of accounting. Like, they are better at my job than I am, theoretically. I mean, we've all had bad bosses, but it's very much designed about, like, it's that apprentice system writ large across an organization. Very good for skills transfer, not so good for other things. But that's not the topic of this conversation. But my point is that the organizational strategy mirrors the structure of that organization. So functional organizations with functional hierarchies tend to have functionally oriented strategies. Right? The finance department will do this. The development function will have this strategy. And they may have some obviously cross-functional strategies, but those are often highly complex and carry the greatest level of risk of failure. And so again, one of the things that we look at is, this is where the vision comes into play. because a strong vision is organization wide. It doesn't matter what the structure is. The vision crosses everything. And it can often be very, very clear in terms of your organizational strategy is disconnected from your organizational vision. And usually because the structure of the organization is not configured in such a way that enables that connection to be done well. And we see that in, I think, the vast majority of organizations. Now, that's not to say that every organization should go and restructure. Restructuring is definitely I don't say last minute. It's not the last thing that you do, but it has a massive implication. It's very time consuming and expensive. And most organizations treat restructures as an opportunity to reduce cost. So restructures are fraught with risk, but the connection between structure and strategy has to be clearly understood. Anyway, Morten, you had your hand up as well.
It's okay, it was a small thing, but Tom had a question which I wanted to read, but I just put it in the chat as well. So the question is, are there any strategy methods which we can measure, give organizations critical factor improvement, for example, productivity, quality, market share, profit? So I'm not sure if I managed to read that well, but now it's there in writing as well.
Tom, can you clarify just a little bit what you mean by strategy methods? Because there are a lot of different strategy methods there.
Well, absolutely anything that might be considered that. For example, setting objectives, finding strategies, and implementing them would be the area. Anything that works well is interesting.
Okay, so couple of things to note, and let me share a page. So I've spoken a few times about outcomes and outputs. Let me introduce one other phrase or one other concept, which when my computer will respond, bear with me for 1 second. There it is. All right. Key concept, impact. Now, when we talk about outputs, outcomes, we also then follow that out with impact. So an output being the good or the service being produced, the outcome being the desired behavioral change in a target audience, the impact being the lasting effect and substantial changes required to achieve the vision. As an example, the output for a soup kitchen, the output are the meals that they serve. The outcome is that the behavioral change, someone eats a meal. Your target population, homeless population, gets a chance to eat a healthy meal. But the impact is the reduction of hunger in the population. That's the goal. That's what you're trying to. That's the strategy, or the strategic goal, I should say, of what you're trying to achieve. Now, the first thing that I would note here in terms of a strategic method is that outcome versus output planning, because the first issue is when you plan at the level of outputs, which most organizations do, it has the connection to impact, like your actual business level metrics, productivity, quality, market share, profit, is somewhat intangible. How do you how much did this piece of work impact our bottom line? And for the most part, that is almost impossible to quantify, which is why we want that strategic planning and the breakdown into the actual the plan against the strategy to be done at the level of outcomes, because we would define outcomes as generative, or playing at the output level we would say is definitive, it's restrictive, and it is disconnected from impact. while outcome-based planning would be generative. It allows for much more it allows for more ideas to be expressed, new opportunities to be enacted, and it has a much tighter connection. I mean, not 100% because impact is a big thing, but it does have much greater strategic alignment across the organization. So that'd be one of the first ones that I would like highlight. The second one that I would highlight, which is fairly common, goes into KPIs and OKRs or performance measures. It's not a good presentation if I don't quote Deming at least once. If you give someone a measurable target, they will destroy the company in order to achieve it. And quite often what we find is that, and to go back to my earlier point about the Royal Commission to Misconduct, the measures, the performance management process inside the organization, not normally something that you would connect with a strategic, like improving your organizational strategy. But we know, not just from our research, but from many, many studies, that there is a absolutely direct correlation and connection between how performance management is undertaken in the organization and how effective strategic planning or alignment to strategy is in those organizations. So I'd also be looking at how people are incentivized and measured, not just against creating the strategy, but against implementing the strategy as well. One of the other ones that I would articulate, where are we? We often talk, or one of the other capabilities that we talk about is sensing and responding. Now, the ability to sense and respond proactively, give me a second. Where's my, I've got too many things open, sorry. The ability to sense and respond proactively looks at, I've got way too many, found it. So what we want to see, so the behaviors within sensing and responding, leaders proactively identify and track emerging patterns and trends. Leaders define strategic outcomes in ways that give teams the space to pursue innovative and potentially unforeseen solutions, and everybody anticipates change and views it as a strategic advantage. Those are the three behaviors most strongly related to the ability to sense and respond. Now, the key there comes in, oh, there's a couple of points here, but in terms of the strategic methods here, I mentioned lean portfolio management before. And I should note, there are other methods than LPM. That's probably one of the most commonly used approaches, but LPM gives organizations the ability to rapidly and regularly validate that work is connected to strategy, remains connected to strategy, and is having an impact on the strategy or strategic goals that you're trying to achieve. So we often talk about, and let me bring up, where are we? This one? Yeah, this one. So adaptive finance is a good example. So those of you familiar with adaptive finance will be, or even just honestly project management, the S-curve. A big part of adaptive finance is knowing when to stop investing in something. And most strategic plans, here's $1 million to achieve like the initiative that we've set out. Is that $1 million enough? Who knows? Is it too much? We don't know. We've just estimated that it'll cost us $1 million, and so that's the budget that's been given. But in an adaptive finance, and this could be beyond budgeting, throughput accounting, lean accounting, rolling budgets. There are many different practices here. But in the adaptive finance space, we would be looking at it basically boils down to identifying when the return on investment starts to plateau, when the S curve starts to like slow down, flatten out. That is the point where funding gets redeployed into something that is of greater strategic importance. So that adaptive finance, or those adaptive finance practices, would be one of the key ones that I'd also be highlighting. I'm just trying, is there a,
Even one question about LPM.
Sorry, go.
The rumor on the street goes that companies are actually really struggling to make that work well. So it's a rather well-defined concept in the agile world, but the reality seems to be that a lot of companies are struggling to actually make the means and ends add up in that area. What's your experience with that?
Three answers to that question, because it's not quite it. So yes, some organizations struggle, but most organizations that I see that struggle are one set of organizations struggle for legitimate reasons because there is complexity. How do you handle dynamic allocation when you have an annual, like when you're a publicly listed company that needs to do annual reports to shareholders? How do you handle transparency when you have SOX, compliance, and other like regulatory limitations on who can see specific information? How do you handle like quarterly or rolling budgets when you have an annual tax return that needs to come out to the outside world? So in many ways, the outside world is geared towards this annualized process, right? But if you're trying to be more dynamically internally, there's a disconnect. And so that is a legitimate challenge. I use the word challenge deliberately because it's not a problem, and organizations have solved it. Basically, the finance department acts as an interface, as a buffer. So yes, there are some things that get done annually, but they just have to manage it. Those rolling budgets, which you see as a leader internal to an organization, they handle the translation into the annualized tax return or the financial reporting. Other ones of those are just assumed issues, right? Which is the second point. So challenges which aren't real challenges, but they think they are. And a real one, for example, so I did some work with a bank in Singapore, 15 years ago now. 12 years ago now. And they had an issue where the internal compliance team says, no, you can't do this thing. All right. And why? Because the regulator won't allow us. Right? Now, we pushed back and said, okay, what can we do? How do we work this? And they were just like, you can't do it. We ended up talking to the regulator, and the regulator's like, yeah, that's fine. Of course you can do that. Not a problem whatsoever. Just make sure that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things are captured, measured, and you're good to go. And the constraint was internally generated. It was the assumption that the regulator couldn't, because your internal compliance function, their job is to stop you from being fined or sued by the regulator. That's their job. So they are incentivized. Let's go back to those incentives. They are incentivized for you not to be agile. They're incentivized for you to do the safest possible thing, which is not always the most innovative or dynamic. So there are many cases where the challenge is generated internally, not externally. The other kind of internal challenge that comes up a lot is I like to say politics is the currency of human systems. So we often talk about reducing the cost of change, but we talk about money. If you don't reduce the political cost of change, change will never occur. And changing your budgeting processes requires a lot of political capital to make happen. Now, realistically, it's actually a very straightforward set of changes. You don't even have to replace one of the challenges with things like beyond budgeting or lean accounting is it it requires the finance department to replace their budgeting processes, right? Whereas most financial departments don't have you don't have the legal capital to do that. The reality is that adaptive finance, for the most part, in most organizations, it requires a shift in thinking, but it doesn't require wholesale replacement of how things work. So quite often, and this is a problem, I think, caused by a lot of consultants, where consultants and professional services firms will articulate, it's like, they think of things in terms of big change, because when a consultant comes in, everything's a project. It's a start and a stop. They've got a start date and an end date to their initiative, and everything's got to be done inside that space. But organizations that take this less from a change project to a continuous improvement, they see that adaptive finance, the adoption of adaptive finance happening much easier, much quicker. The third area that I'd like to highlight is the issue which comes up a lot. It's a very specific one, and that's CapEx and OpEx. Capital expenditure versus operational expenditure. It is an absolutely legitimate concern that organizations have, because those are taxed differently. There are different finance and funding implications for capital versus operational investment. And anyone here who's doing strategic planning needs to be aware of that distinction, because corporate strategy and finance are very tightly linked. So it is a clear issue for a lot of organizations, but the reality is it's a very simple solution in most cases, and that is shifting the responsibility from the team back to finance. So rather, how most finance departments work is they go out and they say, give us your budget, right? And the business leader will put down in Excel, usually line by line, here's all the things we're asking for money for, here's the budget, here's the capital, here's the OpEx, and they'll send it off, and then finance will cut 30% off everyone and send out what everyone's budget is. The shift that occurs here is, rather than telling finance what your CapEx and OpEx split is, because if we want to have an adaptive strategy, if we want to be able to shift from doing work A to work B, because work B is more important mid-financial cycle, then the way that finance departments is like, no, you can't do that, because we've planned the ratio of CapEx and OpEx has all been set, and you can't make those changes. It's too hard. Instead, what we do is we shift the responsibility back onto finance, and so it's finance. You tell us, right? What is the CapEx OpEx split that you need us to maintain? And that's what we will maintain as an organizational group. So it shifts that challenge. Now, obviously, if they want an unreasonable split, there has to be a dialogue at the beginning of that process to go, no, like if you want 90% CapEx and 10% OpEx, we can't do that. We've got to maintain systems as well. So we need more than that. But if finance takes the responsibility to define that ratio, the teams just have to comply with that, which is a much more predictable. It's much easier for the entire organization than assuming that every single department knows ahead of time, 12 months ahead of time, what their CapEx and OpEx split is going to be when things might change. So those are some of the key shifts that we see globally around that.
Thank you. We are sort of approaching the top of the hour, so I thought we would try to keep that. So there's just one question I want to ask, going back to the beginning. What change have you seen to the area of strategy recently? Is there anything changing? I mean, is the interest in the area going up, or is it just like it's always been? Any observations or views from your side?
Absolutely. So adaptive strategy, from like I showed in terms of the annual trends, over the last 8 years, we have seen a steady, fairly linear excluding last year's drop and this year's rebound, or 2023's drop and 2024's rebound, we've seen a steady improvement in the or increase in the adoption and the maturity of organizations adopting adaptive strategy approaches. Strategic planning, both in terms of corporate strategy and operational strategy. Right? The challenges, what's been interesting is we saw these trends continue to improve through the pandemic. We saw these trends continue. We saw the investment and the adoption continue to grow whilst the world was turned upside down. The dip in 2023 coincided with the post-pandemic layoffs, and almost like the breakdown of trust in organizations, the realignment of organizations, and they forgot to be customer centric. They forgot to listen. They just come out of the pandemic straight into economic crisis. They were cutting costs, laying off people, stopping initiatives. Customers were dissatisfied. It was a I'm not going to swear, but it didn't go very well. And we've seen organizations pick that back up in the last 12 months. The other thing that I would note here is from I mentioned things like LPM or the performance management processes. I mentioned things like outcome-based planning versus output-based planning as sort of tactics and strategies or approaches that organizations use to improve their adaptive strategy. What I would just quickly draw people's attention back to are the behaviors. I'll share my screen again. The reason we measure behaviors, and the singular reason we measure behaviors. These are the behaviors for sensing response. Adaptive strategies. The reason we measure behaviors is that behaviors are observable and measurable. Ultimately, the practice that you use, the approach, the technique is irrelevant, right? Beyond budgeting, throughput accounting, lean accounting, rolling budgets, doesn't matter. LPM, adaptive portfolio management, or any one of those different portfolio or planning processes, doesn't matter. The question is, do your leaders, do your executives create vivid and inspiring visions and ensure everyone is aligned to them? Does everyone plan using outcomes versus outputs? Do leaders frequently review their strategy, update it as necessary, and plan over multiple time horizons? Right? And beyond that, like the sense and respond, do leaders define strategic outcomes in ways that give space for unforeseen opportunities? Does everyone anticipate change as a strategic opportunity? These are the behavioral changes that you need to develop in your organization. The specific method to achieve that doesn't matter. If you behave in this way, then you have strategic agility.
Thank you. I know we are close to the end of our time. Tom had some questions. Do you have time to have a look at those? Evan, they are in the chat.
Okay. So what's the measured ROI of LPM? I need to find out. I don't have that data on the top of my head. The ROI of those behavioral changes, we do have that data for, because obviously we've been measuring companies for years. If we look at it from a financial standpoint, organizations that rate higher, that's not what I want, sorry. Organizations that rate higher in these behaviors, this is not just those three, this is across all of them, organizations that saw decreasing business agility across all those behaviors saw revenue growth over the last 7 years go up by 8%. Organizations that saw increasing business agility across all of those behaviors saw revenue growth go up by 31%. Right? So a 23% difference. And I don't know between you, but I'd rather 31% growth than 8% growth. We also see the same trends in terms of employee engagement scores. Would you organize, and this is based on Glassdoor data, like, would you recommend this organization to a friend? Again, organizations that saw increasing business agility, again, those behaviors over the last 7-8 years. Their Glassdoor, would you recommend, went up by 10%. Those that went down, their Glassdoor ratings went down 4%. So a 15% variance in those organizational cohorts. So again, that's not specific to those behaviors. It's damn near impossible to correlate a specific behavior at the top line of an organizational the whole organization, just because of the way that like data works. I will also note these are correlations, not causations. Be absolutely clear that these things go up or down together. It is not to say that business agility makes you more money. It correlates to making more money, but it is scientifically impossible, or damn near impossible, to prove that it has a causative effect, because this is a complex system, complex adaptive system with so many variables that for us to remove every variable to say this is a causative effect is damn near impossible. What we can say, it is a very, very strong correlation.
Thank you. A few minutes over. Evan, is there anything we can do for you?
I slutet av 80-talet var andelen psykiatriska diagnoser 14% av de långa
I think that's,
if anyone's got any questions, please reach out to me. Happy to chat.
40%. Och det är de stressrelaterade diagnoserna som ökat mest.
I think it's a chatter from Tom's microphone we can hear in the background.
4 åren har...
So good.
Anything else from anyone? Or, Evan, I'm not sure if you heard, is there anything we can do for you?
No, just if anyone's got any questions, you know where I am. Please reach out to me. Happy to chat.
Thank you very much for doing this. Hope to see you all again soon. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you, everyone.